Hey guys, in this video let's review Operation Abyss and Babel. After finishing both of them, here I'll be talking about their story, gameplay, graphics and music, so be sure to look at the timestamps in case there's something you wanna check. And you can find these games on VITA and Steam. Without further ado, let's begin. The story presented here follows a student that was abducted in his way back home, where he notices that there are some severed bodies around him, releasing a sweet but pungent smell, where suddenly another person arrives to the scene, stating that he is there to rescue this kidnapped student, where soon enough the entities that kidnapped the MC appear. Facing these enemies as they are is but a bad idea, having no more options than escaping. While running away they are ambushed by a fierce creature, injuring our mysterious friend. Moments later a girl also joined this group, stating that this enemy is no match for her. Seconds later she uses her code Rise, granting her an armor and weapon to confront the beast. After beating the beast, she presents herself as Alice Mifune, captain of the Ed's squad. Moments later they return to Hinowa Academy, where they take a hidden elevator that reaches the Ed's HQ. Here they start explaining that what they found were variants, and that these students have what they need to be part of the Ed's. In the first half of the game, originally known as Code Hazard, they'll explain how some variants are created, why some groups need to kidnap lots of people, how the Code Rise works, and what are the abysses, or in other words, places that suddenly turn into labyrinths filled with vicious beasts. The second half of the game follows the story of Codebreaker, where in-game setting, these students jump into their second semester, where the activity of the Eds starts to get monitored by an agent of the government, and Alice is nowhere to be found. Here most of the story flows in a better way, as there are less dumb things related to their lives in the academy, because these parts, while they add some background, in all honesty they don't hit the right spot. On the other hand, I will argue that some of those moments diminish this story. But leaving some of those moments aside, inside of the dungeons there are interesting explanations and moments that reach high points in this narrative, where we will understand later why Alice left the team and her true identity. In Operation Babel we follow the third part in this story. The original name was Code Realize, where a new enemy appeared in the world named Embryo, where the Eds had a fierce fight, where later on Alice takes the lead in a last assault on the core. In this last struggle, our heroine will fight some characters that we saw in Operation Abyss. After Alice beats this girl, another entity explains that the humans cannot oppose to gods, initiating the first loop in time, where Alice is locked in a particular data space. From here on out, a new squad is assembled, where the scenes at the school were reduced, which I really appreciate because this story focuses much more into what is the reality of Tokyo after World War II, what is Babel Sphere's purpose, and how other worlds were terminated by this new menace. Once I put into perspective these three stories, I consider that they escalated really well their narrative, from perhaps the most of classic approaches where you need to fight a couple of organizations to having to defend themselves from apparent gods, where Babel takes a way better approach. I will give these stories a 6.5 and an 8.5. A question that may arise is, do I have to play Abyss to get Babel? I will only say that it affects like 20% because in Abyss you get to know what happened to Noriko, which plays a backup role in Babel, what happened to the prior Ed's lead, who is Masa Muramasa, Mula, the events that occur at the cemetery involving the government, and stuff like that. However, I will say that you can let slide some of those moments. Perhaps the one that may be a bit more meaningful is about the cemetery, because there are some puzzles and answers related to Abyss events. Gameplay-wise, the idea of the game is to create your squad with one of two approaches. The old school one, where your characters will show what you equip as you proceed in this story, or the newer one, with defined sprites. Whatever the one you choose, both games are kinda similar, where you have some available classes. For the most part, I will say that they took on some classic approaches, with warriors, samurais, ninjas, paladins, wizards, physicians, rangers, and so on. At the beginning of Abyss we have access to 8 classes, where once we reach the second half of the game, you will receive monks and conjurers. What is worth mentioning here is that Abyss, due to its mid-section of the game, it imposes a level cap of 20, until you finish its first half. giving you a small chance to reclass your characters if it is needed, as you will be able to level up quite fast in that last dungeon. However, this can also turn the game into something stagnant, where ideally I am sure people would like to see a constant character progression, where unfortunately it is really slow in Abyss. This is addressed in Babel, giving you the chance to choose one class and subclass almost right away, where the only thing is that the subclass will increase levels way slower. Nonetheless, this works a bit better the character progression, as well as multiple combinations between classes. I don't consider it is needed to choose specific ones, but the main idea is to either synergize the whole squad or characters alone. For example, Knight and Monk, where ideally your Knight defends the whole group, and while doing that, because of some Monk skills, you have a chance to counter attacks. While on paper it sounds good, it requires some small setups here and there to make it work properly, but the same principle applies to several combinations. These first-person dungeon crawlers are quest-driven, so you need to finish some tasks here and there before proceeding any further. If there is something that grinded my gears so good, is that Operation Abyss has some really annoying level design. At some moments where you need to step on really specific places. If you don't do that, as you didn't trigger event A, B is not going to happen. Subsequently, C, D and so on. So you can reach really deep places and find absolutely nothing. What ends up happening is that you will find yourself moving in circles hours upon hours, because sometimes this happens in places that you have already explored. So once again, reaching a specific place is not that common, as when you say, well, I am exploring a new area, I will eventually find my way. On this front, another thing to consider is that this game has some gimmicky puzzles, where sometimes everything is found on convoluted and unorthodox ideas, where you need to hear some variants and then start doing some specific things. Fortunately, this was fixed on the second game, having a better synergy with the level design, where effectively by exploring you trigger the story events, rather than having to reach really particular places. Once initiating fights, there are some interesting things going on, with some old school ideas, like a finite number of spells that can be used while exploring or fighting. This may seem kinda annoying, but I believe that is just at the beginning, with wizards, academics and physicians, as they begin with 3 uses. However, they pack a good punch to the initial enemies, so it feels balanced for the most part. An interesting idea that doesn't work that nicely in Abyss is that the threat level indicator, the higher it is, your probabilities to find wanted variants increase, with some nasty bosses. Fortunately, you have the chance to escape before beginning these particular fights, or with some unity skills. Also, the higher the threat level, the easier it is to find better loot. Now, I said that in Abyss this doesn't work that great, because in practice the loot tables are just really bad. Or I had terrible luck while playing, because I will say that the cool items were but counted, where on the other hand it throws countless kinda meh items. And also, unfortunately, you need to have the minimum level to be able to use the equipment in general, otherwise you cannot even use those few nice drops. In Babel, the loot tables felt a bit more balanced due to the kind of items I found on my playthrough. As for the bosses, most of the wanted variants are kinda easy to manage, but some have really nasty attacks which most of the time land on crits, which is one hit KO. Some annoying ailments where sometimes half of the group gets paralyzed, and on the other side sometimes wanted variants that barely put up a fight, so this definitely needed a bit more of work, because you have no real idea if it is going to be nerve-wracking or just another walk in the park. I would give them 6 and 8.5. Here Babel is the one that has the best gameplay. Were not for an insanely long adventure, it definitely delivers a good experience. On the other hand, Abyss is a bit painful on several fronts. It is a decent DRPG, but its level design can be annoying as heck. In the graphics section, I usually check multiple things like issues, creativity, frames, or other technical things worth mentioning. The only small glitch I had was in Babel, where for some reason once the second loop of a particular track plays, it becomes into annoying white noise. Other than that, no particular issues. I played these games on Steam, and unfortunately they do not offer really high resolutions, but 1080 works fine for me. Maybe another thing worth mentioning is that for some reason you need to set the resolution in Babel prior to load your file, otherwise it auto-resets to the smallest one. Technical issues aside, you don't need but a potato to run these games. And there are no drops until the credits, where it is really easy to notice that this doesn't flow that well. As for the general creativity, it was of my liking for the most part, with Experience Inc. classic approach, where there is something like an enemy progression from something small to really big enemies. Nonetheless, sometimes there is a big lack in creativity with some sprites, where I was wondering why. This small lack of creativity also strikes on some dungeons, with repainted walls and stuff like that. But it doesn't bother me that much. I believe this becomes much more apparent once you play both games, because in Abyss they had some ideas at first. In the second half you need to re-explore some areas, and there are multiple layouts that were changed, but the background is pretty much the same. In Babel some of these areas were reused, but also this one throws newer dungeons with interesting ideas. In general, I will say that there is a good synergy between game setting, monsters and environment. I will give them a 7 to both of them. And last but not least, it's music. Naoki Jimbo is the main composer of these tracks as far as I know. Here there are two basic approaches between stupidly epic and more like environmental soundtracks. What do I mean with this? There are places like the hospital that plays a track with an eerie vibe, which fits really well its particular setting, or some other dungeons where there is nothing but background noise, which in a sense works. However, that can turn the experience into something a bit monotonous, as there are big areas where you will wander a good chunk of time. As for the combat tracks, be prepared to hear something reminiscent to the disco era, but refurbished with a heavier approach, throwing some violins, piano and orchestral arrangements that fit really well for the most combat tracks. It is fair to say that there are a couple that don't hit the right spot, but that is more in Abyss' second half. Other than that, Babel takes some Abyss tracks and delivers a much better game, as you will hear different combat tracks depending from the area where you are. So it never feels as annoying as some games where they use the same track countless times. I will give them an 8 and a 9. I definitely enjoy these tracks. The final scores are 6.8 and 8.2. From these two games, the one I definitely recommend is Operation Babel. Its main story is not insanely long, and it drastically improves on many areas, making this journey into something much more enjoyable. Where on the other hand, I wouldn't really recommend Abyss to the average player. If you want to explore another DRPG, maybe yeah, it can be a decent option, but in all honesty there are many others I would recommend before that game. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.